Hello, welcome to day 2 of Ledbury at home. I hope you've received the email, got the handouts. I hope you managed to listen to or watch yesterday's talk, which is an introduction. Today we're moving into talk number 2, talk title, Hid from Our Eyes, the Unsearchable God. Hid from our eyes, the Unsearchable God. Yesterday I asked you to write down 5 words to describe who God is. If you did that yesterday, have a look at what you wrote down and recall what you did. If you didn't do it, have a go at doing it now. I'll give you a bit of time. You can pause the video and we'll be back in just a second. Here's my question for you. Here's my question. How much of the God of the universe have you captured in your description? How much have you captured? Listen to this from Stephen Charnock, who is an old theologian in the 17th century, a Puritan, and wrote extraordinary, deep works on who God is. He said this: whatever God is, he is infinitely so. He is infinite wisdom, infinite goodness, infinite knowledge, infinite power, infinite spirit. Infinitely distant from the weakness of creatures, infinitely mounted above the excellencies of creatures. Conceive of him as excellent without any imperfection, a spirit without parts, great without quantity, perfect without quality, everywhere without place, powerful without members, understanding without ignorance, wise without reasoning, light without darkness, infinitely more excelling the beauty of all creatures than the light in the sun. And when you have risen to the highest, conceive him yet infinitely above all you can conceive, and acknowledge the infirmity of your own minds. And whatsoever conception comes into your minds, say, this is not God. God is more than this. This is not God. God is more than this. We prize and we treasure the fact that we can know God, the fact that he can be known, that God makes himself known, that God speaks, that God has made himself known in Jesus. And so it's slightly unfamiliar, maybe slightly unfamiliar or even disconcerting to us to be told that when we conceive him in our minds, we should say, this is not God. But yes, it is true, because in the words of that hymn, God dwells in light inaccessible, hid from our eyes. Or the words of 1 Timothy 6, God dwells in inapproachable light. Or the words of John 1, really familiar words, no one has ever seen God. No one has ever known God. Today we're going to be pushed into slightly unfamiliar territory, take us into territory we've not walked before, and it may be in some ways disconcerting for us. Can sometimes, when something that you think is familiar is shed in a new light, that's a slightly strange experience, isn't it? So Coca-Cola, I love Coca-Cola. I bought 6 cans of Coke from Sainsbury's the other day, and I've been working my way through them. And Coca-Cola is just sweet goodness. But when and if I was to get one of my teeth and stick my tooth into a cup of Coca-Cola overnight, I'm reliably informed that the outcome wouldn't be enjoyable. It would shed Coca-Cola in a new light. So what Coke does is destroy your teeth. Or think about, slightly more positively, think about the underground. You have that picture of the underground, the map in the underground, and it tells you where the stations are and where you go. It tells you how you get from A to B with the different tube lines and different colours, and it looks very neat and tidy and impressive. If you were to see the tube map in reality, what it actually looked like, it looks very different, disconcerting and unfamiliar to you. And as we take a tour of ground that we know very well, but as we take a tour in a way that shows us it in a different light, the smells might be strange, the sights disconcerting, our step might become slightly unsure, but it won't be to give us some hidden truths which are hidden for everyone else, but we become the kind of elite group that sees it in a way that no one else sees it. Instead, we're going to be seeing the tour in a different light for 2 reasons. One is the danger of over-familiarity. I grew up in church, and I remember when I got to the age of sort of 11 or 12, we got given youth Bibles, purple covers, and we looked at the Bible every week in Sunday school. But along with the Bible in these youth Bibles, there were little boxes kind of excerpts telling us about teenagers who'd done various things. So, for instance, Tony, who started to pray before he took tests at school. And when we were meant to be looking at the Bible in Sunday school, I would almost invariably find these little excerpts about Tony and Amanda and Amy far more interesting than the Bible we were meant to be looking at. I basically thought I knew the Bible stories. I was bored with them. Or take relatives. I grew up with a granddad who's a farmer. That's why I'm from farming stock, as you well know. I grew up with a granddad who's a farmer. And as I grew up, the thing about Gran is I kind of knew him. He farmed a lot and he knew lots about farming, and he was my granddad. But I couldn't really talk to him about pop music or about sport or about TV and say, what did I talk with my granddad? What did I talk with him about? It was really tricky. He was just there. But then I got older and I started to realise that I could ask my granddad questions. And suddenly this whole world opened up. Because my granddad lived through World War II. My granddad farmed the land to feed the country during World War II. He knew an extraordinary amount about tractors arriving from the United States to the UK to make us more efficient in our farming. Suddenly I started to realise, how could I ever have found this wonderful man boring? He's lived in the same little area of North Yorkshire in the shadow of the North Yorkshire moors for his entire life. I think he knows a little corner of our country better than anyone else alive knows it. How could I have found him boring? It was only when I started to see him in a new light that I realised how extraordinary a man my granddad is. As granddad was defamiliarised, he became much more than I thought, and much more incredible as a result. And my hope is that the same will be true with God, for those of us that are over familiar. But there's another danger, there's under-familiarity. Remember yesterday I said that we live in a world, a Western culture, that has forgotten God. We suffer a deep malaise when it comes to knowing anything about him. Who even is God within Christian understanding? How does the Bible even talk about him? It's a great question to ask. Tell me about the God that you don't believe in. To those who wouldn't say they believe in God, tell me about the God that you don't believe in. Because often the God that people don't believe in is a God that has very little to do with the Christian God at all. So Christopher Hitchens, noted atheist, who sadly died a few years ago, he once said this, a picture of God as a North Korean type dictator. He said, I think it would be rather awful if it were true. If there was a permanent, totally round-the-clock supervision and invigilation of everything he did, you would never have a waking or sleeping moment where you weren't being watched and controlled and supervised by some celestial entity from the moment of your conception to the moment of your death. It would be like living in North Korea. And there you've got to say that Christopher Hitchens' view of God is nothing like the Christian view of God. Tell me about the God that you don't believe in. And it's possible that some of us are just really unfamiliar with who God even is. And we're quite new to this sort of stuff. And we're not really sure what we even mean when we say we believe in God. So to those of us that might become over-familiar, to those of us that might be under-familiar, what my hope is that we'll see the true picture of God in the scriptures. And yet, before we start there, we need to realise how little we can possibly see. How little we can possibly know. Because the God of the Bible cannot be fathomed. And we're going to see that in Isaiah 40. So do listen along, read along with me as I read from Isaiah 40 verse 12, which is where we're going to go. Isaiah 40 verse 12. Let me read. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, or with the breadth of his hand marked off the heavens? Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket, or weighed the mountains on the scales and the hills in a balance? Who can fathom the Spirit of the Lord, or instruct the Lord as his counsellor? Whom did the Lord consult to enlighten him, and who taught him the right way? Who was it that taught him knowledge, or showed him the path of understanding? Surely the nations are like a drop in a bucket. They are regarded as dust on the scales. He weighs the islands as though they were fine dust. Lebanon is not sufficient for altar fires, nor its animals enough for burnt offerings. Before him all the nations are as nothing. They are regarded by him as worthless and less than nothing. With whom then will you compare God? To what image will you liken him? As for an idol, a metalworker casts it, a goldsmith overlays it with gold and fashions silver chains for it. A person too poor to present such an offering selects wood that will not rot. They look for a skilled worker to set up an idol that will not topple. Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood since the earth was founded? He sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and its people are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like a tent to live in. He brings princes to naught and reduces the rulers of this world to nothing. No sooner are they planted, no sooner are they sown, no sooner do they take root in the ground than he blows on them and they wither, and a whirlwind sweeps them away like chaff. To whom will you compare me, or who is my equal, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls forth each of them by name. Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. Why do you complain, Jacob? Why do you say, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, my cause is disregarded by my God? Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. His understanding no one can fathom. He cannot be fathomed. He is the creator and the ruler. Did you notice that? Twice we learn that he is unfathomable, unsearchable. To fathom something means to take the measure of. Can you measure the depths of the God of the universe? Can you plunge his depths? Can you weigh him up and make your assessments? Lots of us will be Oxford University students, and so we're used to getting our head around stuff. We love getting our head around stuff, taking on all the data, analysing everything, seeking to crack something, get something. At least when we start, the art students among us will think that this essay will be the final definitive word on this topic. By the time we finish, we realise it wasn't. But at the beginning, we long for it to be the final word. All of us got that little voice in our heads. Maybe this will do it. Maybe this will be it. Can you do that? Can you do that with the God of the universe? Well, what is he like? Take water. The Atlantic Ocean contains 310,410,900 cubic kilometres of water. Put another way, 1 cubic kilometre is 1,200 billion litres. How much of water can you measure in the hollow of your hand? Let's see how much I can measure in the hollow of my hand. My glamorous assistant's going to help me. I've got 200 millilitres of water in this jug. Sam, start pouring water in. Let's see how much. Okay, stop, it's going everywhere. How much is that? Maybe 100 millilitres of water, possibly, measured in the hollow of my hands. Who do you think has measured all the water in all the streams and ponds and rivers and lakes and underground caverns and inland seas and oceans in all the continents of the world? Verse 12. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hands? Well, take the sky. How far can you measure with the breadth of your hands? Who do you think has measured from Birmingham to Brighton, Oxford to Amman, from London to Lanzarote or Singapore to Southport? With the breadth of his hand marked off the heavens. Well, take dust. Just look outside the window if you're near a window. The earth that covers every inch of this planet. Millions of grains of sand on the beaches around the continents. The dust that blows across the deserts. The storms that throw up huge dust clouds that roll across the horizon. How much dust could you get in the rucksack that carries your books into college? Who can drop it all in his shopping basket? Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket? Or take the mountains. There are 14 mountains above 8,000 metres on this planet. Everest is the biggest of them all at 8,848 metres. How would you begin to go about measuring the mass of rock that rears 8,000 metres into the sky? How would you even begin to imagine the terrible weight of all of that peak as it climbs and climbs and climbs and climbs and reaches even to the point in which the air begins to run out? Well, who has weighed the mountains on the scales and the hills in a balance? Or later, when you look up at the sky, and if we were at Ledbury right now, I would say look up at the sky when it's dark, and assuming there's no clouds, you'll be able to see so many stars, so bright. If you're in cities around the country or around the world, you won't be able to do that. But if you were, and when you do, when you look up and you see some, about 5,000 naked to the visible eye, but millions upon millions upon millions more, stars from across the cosmos, light that has fled the galaxy until it's reached to our Milky Way and our solar system and our little rock that we call Earth and our little corner of the sky in an island called Great Britain, maybe, and a tiny little eye that looks up. And when you gaze up at that marvel, ask yourself the question, who has created every single one? Who can number every single star in every single corner of every single galaxy? Who could gaze at the entirety of almost infinite space and tell you the star that has just burnt itself out and become a white dwarf? Ask yourself the question and then look at verse 26. Lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? Who brings out the starry host one by one and calls forth each of them by name? Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. And when you ask yourself these questions about water and mountains and stars and the dust of the earth, when you ask yourself these questions, ask yourself this great question: can I fathom him? Can I contain him? Can I possibly describe him? Or is he more than this? Always more. Shall I then put it like this? Question: who is the real treasure and worth? Answer: the Lord who fills heaven and earth. God in his essence is infinite, transcendent, unlimited, exhibited in omnipresence. All things before his eyes are laid bare as he governs the earth and skies with great care. There's not one sector or section that's undetected or left unaffected by his perfection. So I don't even need to smell the marijuana stench to know my God is deeper than the Mariana Trench. The calculation is 36,000 feet below sea level, about 7 miles deep. If you got to the bottom without imploding from the weight, God would be waiting there saying, "Yo man, you're late." In the farthest galaxies, my God has the glory, because distance for God is a non-category. Amazingly, God is able to be in Haiti and Greece, Jamaica and Sweden, Barbados, New Zealand, Lithuania, Egypt, Malaysia, Tunisia and the Arabian Sea simultaneously. That is the God of the universe. And what goes for the physical universe goes for human beings too. The mighty nations in verse 15 to 17, empires that bestride the globe and cast reality in its own vision, the ancient Egyptians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the British, the Americans, the Soviet Union, the Chinese in the years to come. And the Lord looks at the empire of human civilization as if they're a speck of dust on the chemistry scales that a gloved hand needs to swat away. Verse 22, millions of people living across this world, moving hither and thither, the centre of their own worlds. And the Lord peers down from heaven, and the millions upon millions upon millions of humans living their 70 or their 80 years, like looking down on grasshoppers from the infinite reaches of space. Or princes in verse 23, the rich and the famous and the powerful, world leaders and A-list movie stars, the colossal figures of history whose great and fearsome deeds are remembered and venerated, those whose graves we visit, those who need only speak and hundreds run to do their bidding, those who hold the fate seemingly in their own hands, unimaginable wealth to use for good or for ill. And the Lord looks down. Have a look at verse 24. The Lord looks down. No sooner are they planted, sown, no sooner do they take root in the ground, than he blows on them and they wither, and a whirlwind sweeps them away like chaff. Let me tell you a story. I'm just going to make the story up right now. It's about a guy called Tommy, a 13-year-old boy called Tommy. And Tommy doesn't know it yet, but under Tommy's bed there is a door reaching to outer worlds. But at the moment, Tommy is late to get to school and his friend called Max is waiting at the end of the lane. And so Tommy leaves the house, hurrying out for getting his lunch. Question. Can little Tommy, 13-year-old Tommy, can Tommy know who I am? The creator of the story, the storyteller. No, of course Tommy can't know me, because Tommy is a character in my story. His world is whatever I create. He can't possibly reach beyond the confines of the story to understand me. So it is with the Lord of the universe. He's not just a bigger version of ourselves. He's not a character in the grand story of existence. He's not a character or an idea to be examined or a category to be assessed. No, this God can't be questioned and examined and found to be in the right or found to be wanting. He's the author and the creator and the maker of all reality. We can just as much fathom him as Tommy could reach beyond the grand category divide between a character in a story and a storyteller and tell his little friend Max what their creator is like. We cannot search him out or see through him or categorize him. We cannot plumb his depths. Sometimes there are people who read people really well. You might know someone that just seems to get you at a very deep level, very easily, very quickly, describes you better than you can describe yourself. They read people well, but the God of the universe is unreadable. The way that Isaiah applies this is to our present circumstances in verse 27. Why do you complain, Jacob? Why do you say, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord? My cause is disregarded by my God. You see, we can't read off of our circumstances what seems to be happening on our own little corner of reality, what God is doing or what God is thinking or what God is up to. How important it is in the world in which we live today to recognise that we cannot read off of circumstances what God is like or what God is doing. God cannot be fathomed, and God cannot be compared. Have a look at verse 18 to 20, the middle of the kind of sandwich of this chapter. With whom then will you compare God? To what image will you liken him? You see, when we get brought face to face with the massive reality of a God who cannot be fathomed, what we want to do, desperately want to do, is shrink him down to our size. We want to fit him into our boxes. What the Bible calls that is idolatry. Then it would have been literal statues, hence the metal workers and the woodworkers of the passage. Now it might be our mental vision or picture of God, whatever he might be. So it's good for all of us to be thinking, who do I think God really is? Because we have a tendency to shrink him down to what is manageable. A grandfather in the sky, a cheerleader for our lives, a God who we imagine must play by the rules of this universe. A.W. Tozer, who I quoted yesterday, said it like this. Left to ourselves, he says, we tend to immediately reduce God to manageable terms. We want to get him where we can use him, or at least know where he is when we need him. We want a God we can in some measure control. We need the feeling of security that comes from knowing what God is like. And what he is like is, of course, a composite of all the religious pictures we have seen, all the best people we have known or heard about, and all the sublime ideas we have entertained. I think there are at least two ways that we might do this. Two ways we might reduce God to manageable terms. One is a God who is less than Scripture shows him to be. I don't like the idea that God might ... The film Stepford Wives, or the TV series Stepford Wives, men create wives in their own image, kind of robot wives. Wives who will never disagree with them and always love them. And it may be that we're tempted to create a Stepford God. God in our image, a God who always agrees with us. But just for a moment, think about the breadth of cultures across the world. Wouldn't we expect this unfathomable, unsearchable God to disagree with every single human culture at different points? And couldn't it be possible that he might disagree with what the culture in any given place most prizes? Because the God of the universe is not a Stepford God. He's not a God that we create in our own image. That's one way we might reduce him to manageable terms. The other way, though, is a God who is only what our understanding of the Bible shows him to be. A God who is only what our understanding of the Bible shows him to be. I guess those of us that care about truth, who think we know the truth, who understand truth, who promote the truth, who contend for the truth, might be in danger of this. We say we can understand God, we can comprehend God. We don't like mystery, we're uncomfortable with that category. And if you're that sort of person, right now you're probably thinking, how are you using mystery here, Joel? Because in the Bible, mystery is something that was hidden, but has now been disclosed, made known. And if you're thinking that, you're the sort of person that I'm talking to right now. Because we need to learn to say that whatever categories or concepts or understanding we have in our heads and our minds, we need to learn to say this is not God. God is more than this. And of course, even if we do have some sense of right conception of the God of the universe in our minds, what we actually believe is betrayed by the way that we live and the way we feel towards him. We cannot fathom him. We cannot compare him. Yet he can be seen. Have a look back. We didn't read these before, these verses, but have a look back at chapter 40, verses 3 to 5, just before what we read. A voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, the rugged places a plain, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all people will see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. The hidden one will be seen. So can we claim to see God? Can we claim that God is knowable? The answer is a glorious yes. And theologians for hundreds of years have talked about how this might be true. One way is that the God of the universe, this unfathomable God of the universe, has created a universe to be known. So take marriage, for instance. We think, marriage, it's about a man and a woman being married. But if we compare Genesis 2 and Ephesians 5, we see that the ultimate reason the God of the universe created marriage, this thing that we can understand and comprehend in this world, the ultimate reason is to teach us something of what Jesus' relationship with his people is like. God has made a universe, and that's just one example of this, but God has made a universe as a fitting vehicle to reveal something about himself. Or think about the way that a mother with her toddler might make herself known to her toddler. Her toddler understands very little, but a mother stoops down and as it were, speaks baby talk to her son or her daughter, so that her little son or daughter might in some sense understand her. And that is what the God of the universe has done. He has stooped down and lisped to us in baby talk, in human language, so that we might know him. But most of all, and best of all, the author has written himself into the story. Think about my story about Tommy earlier. Imagine one day Tommy was out and about on his way to school, still doesn't know about the door into other worlds under his bed. But then a very cool man, who's remarkably well dressed, walks up to him and says, "Hello Tommy, my name is Joel. I'm the writer of your story." And I could write myself into this story, couldn't I? That would be possible. But of course, if I did that, the character Joel in the story would still just be that, a character. It wouldn't actually be me. But the Lord is able to write himself into the story by actually walking into the story. And we ask how that can be. How can this unsearchable, unfathomable God, impossible to fathom or compare, how might he walk into the creation that he has made? And we can only reply that the incarnation is a miracle upon a miracle. And it's so easy buried underneath mountains of mince pies and sickly sweet stories about the baby Jesus at Christmas time. It so easily becomes unfamiliar to us. But in reality, John 1:18 No one has ever seen God, but God, the one and only, who is at the Father's side, has made him known. We're going to put a link to a song called Arrival under the line, and I'm going to read some words. I love this song. I've quoted it before on a Sunday. I love the song. It opens up to us the miracle that the unfathomable God might be made known. This is how it goes, some of it. Who is God that he would take our frame, the artisan inside the paint, or breathe the very air his breath sustains, the architect inside the plan? Oh, come now, hail his arrival, the God of creation, royalty robed in the flesh he created. Jesus the Maker has made himself known. All hail the infant God. The one who had no start and knows no end became confined in time and tense. The everlasting God, the great I am, in the mercy of a mother's hands. Oh, come now, hail his arrival, the God of creation, royalty robed in the flesh he created. Jesus the Maker has made himself known. All hail the infant God. The one who holds the stars in the creases of his hands is the one who holds my heart like a mother once held him. The one who knows what lies where space has run its course, embraced the baby's mind, and now I can know my God. You cannot fathom him, you cannot compare him, but you can know him. Why don't I lead us in prayer? Almighty God, please would we see something of the miracle of the birth of King Jesus. You cannot be fathomed. You are far too big for us to contain. Whatever our picture of you in our heads, you are more than that picture. We cannot possibly compare you. We are so prone to creating an idol of you in our own heads and our own hearts, but we praise you that in Jesus' birth, you can be seen and you can be known. In his name, amen.